Super Scholars and Super Families. I hope everyone's having a marvelous Monday so far. I have missed you all terribly. I know we've had a little extended spring break, but we're back and we're ready to learn, and we're kicking off our reading learning going back to Holes. Okay, so I want to give everybody a few minutes to get their Holes book out as well as their chapter questions. Today we're going to go back in time because it's been a long time since you read this book, and we're going to start with chapters 1 through 5. So that's the page you need to be on in this packet. Okay, it's page 1, very first one there. So flip to page 1 in your packet. And then get your Holes book ready on standby. I'll give you a minute to get those things together. All right, hopefully everybody's got their stuff ready and they're ready to start talking about it. So I know that we've already read part of Holes, but it's been a while, so we wanted to flash back and give you a reminder. If you've been reading on your own, that's perfectly fine and you remember, but it can't ever hurt to have a little refresher, right? So what we're going to go back to talking about is the start of Holes, the exposition when everything's building up and they're introducing it to us. One of the main things we usually think about when we think of the exposition is the setting. So today we're going to be learning about how to describe the setting of a story and how it sets the tone of the book. Now, the tone is the feeling you get when you read a book. So if it's making you feel happy or sad or angry, okay, the tone is the feeling you're getting when you're reading that book. So we want to look at how the setting helps us create those feelings. You'll know that you have this and you understand it when you're able to describe the setting of Camp Green Lake and also tell me about how some of the feelings it would cause you to have. Okay. I'm going to be reading you some of these chapters. We're going to start with chapter 1 through 3, and I'm going to read those to you, and then I'll let you all read chapters 4 and 5 again on your own, since it is that refresher. So everybody go ahead and get your books and follow along with me. We're going to start in chapter 1. It's on page 3. Give you just a second to get there with me. Remember, we're talking about the setting. So as I'm reading these 3 chapters, I want for you to be thinking about how is it describing this setting? What are you thinking about and what can you picture in your mind when you hear me read it? Okay, chapter 1. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There was once a very large lake here, the largest lake in Texas. That was over 100 years ago. Now it is just a dry, flat wasteland. There used to be a town of Green Lake as well. The town shriveled up and died, along with the lake and the people who lived there. During the summer, the daytime temperature hovers around 95 degrees in the shade, if you can find any shade. There's not much shade in a big dry lake. The only trees are 2 old oaks on the eastern edge of the lake. A hammock is stretched between the 2 trees, and a log cabin stands behind that. The campers are forbidden to lie in the hammock. It belongs to the warden. The warden owns the shade. Out on the lake, rattlesnakes and scorpions find shade under rocks and in the holes dug by the campers. Here's a good rule to remember about rattlesnakes and scorpions. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you, usually. Being bitten by a scorpion or even a rattlesnake is not the worst thing that can happen to you. You won't die, usually. Sometimes a camper will try to be bitten by a scorpion or even a small rattlesnake. Then he'll get to spend a day or 2 recovering in his tent instead of having to dig a hole out on the lake. But you don't want to be bitten by a yellow spotted lizard. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. You will die a slow and painful death, always. If you get bitten by a yellow spotted lizard, you might as well go into the shade of the oak trees and lie in the hammock. There's nothing anyone can do to you anymore. Now, I know that you're wondering the same thing I'm wondering. How bad is Camp Green Lake if you're willing to get bitten by a rattlesnake or a scorpion just to not dig a hole? That's got to be pretty rough. I don't think that I would want myself bitten by a scorpion or a rattlesnake. Think back to when 4 H came and brought those Kentucky scorpions, what they looked like. Can you imagine getting stung by one of those? Ooh, I'm not about it. Chapter 2. The reader's probably asking, why would anyone go to Camp Green Lake? I have that same question. Most campers aren't given a choice. Camp Green Lake is a camp for bad boys. If you take a bad boy and make him dig a hole every day in the hot sun, it will turn him into a good boy. That was what some people thought. Stanley Yelnats was given a choice. The judge said, you may go to jail or you may go to Camp Green Lake. Stanley was from a poor family. He'd never been to camp before. If you heard Camp Green Lake, would you think probably what Stanley is thinking? Camp? Sounds pretty cool. Probably a lake. I can get with it. Do you think Stanley's going to be in for a big surprise? Yes, I think he might be disappointed. Chapter 3. This is the last one I'm going to read to you, and I'll let you all read the last two on your own. Stanley Yelnats was the only passenger on the bus, not counting the driver or the guard. The guard sat next to the driver in his seat, turned around facing Stanley. A rifle lay across his lap. Stanley was sitting about 10 rows back, handcuffed to his armrest. His backpack lay on the seat next to him. It contained his toothbrush, toothpaste, a box of stationery his mother had given him. He'd promised to write her at least once a week. He looked out the window, although there wasn't much to see, mostly fields of hay and cotton. There was a long bus ride to nowhere. The bus wasn't air-conditioned, and the hot, heavy air was almost as stifling as the handcuffs. Stanley and his parents had tried to pretend that he was just going away to camp for a while, just like the rich kids do. When Stanley was younger, he used to play with stuffed animals and pretend the animals were at camp. Camp fun and games, he called it. Sometimes he'd have them play soccer with a marble. Other times, they'd run an obstacle course or go bungee jumping off a table, tied to broken rubber bands. Now Stanley tried to pretend that he was going to Camp Fun and Games. Maybe he'd make some friends, he thought. At least he'd get to swim in the lake. He didn't have any friends at home. He was overweight, and the kids at his middle school often teased him about his size. Even his teachers sometimes made cruel comments without realizing it. On his last day of school, his math teacher, Miss Bell, taught ratios. As an example, she chose the heaviest kid in class and the lightest kid in class and had them weigh themselves. Stanley weighed 3 times as much as the other boy. Miss Bell wrote the ratio on the board, 3 to 1, unaware of how much embarrassment she had caused both of them. Stanley was arrested later that day. He looked at the guard who sat slumped in his seat and wondered if he'd fallen asleep. The guard was wearing sunglasses, so Stanley couldn't see his eyes. Stanley was not a bad kid. He was innocent for the crime at which he was convicted. He'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was all because of his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. He smiled. It was a family joke. Whenever anything went wrong, they always blamed Stanley's no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. Supposedly, he had a great-great-grandfather who had stolen a pig from a one-legged gypsy and she put a curse on him and all his descendants. Stanley and his parents didn't believe in curses, of course, but whenever anything went wrong, it felt good to blame someone. Things went wrong a lot. They always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked out the window at the vast emptiness. He watched the rise and fall of the telephone wire. In his mind, he could hear his father's gruff voice softly singing to him. If only, the woodpecker sighs. The bark on the tree was just a little bit softer, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely. He cries to the moon, if only, if only. It was the song his father used to sing to him. The melody was sweet and sad, but Stanley's favorite part was when his father would howl the word moon. The bus hit a small bump and the guard sat up, instantly alert. Stanley's father was an inventor. To be a successful inventor, you need to have three things: intelligence, perseverance, and just a little bit of luck. Hopefully y'all remember what perseverance means. It means to keep going even when things get hard. Every time an experiment failed, Stanley could hear him cursing his dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-grandfather. Stanley's father was also named Stanley Yelnats. Stanley's father's full name was Stanley Yelnats III. Ours is Stanley Yelnats IV. Everyone in his family had always liked the fact that Stanley Yelnats was spelled the same frontward and backward, so they kept naming their son Stanley. Stanley was an only child, as was every other Stanley Yelnats before him. All of them had something else in common. Despite their awful luck, they always remained hopeful. As Stanley's father liked to say, I learned from failure. But perhaps that was part of the curse as well. If Stanley and his father weren't always hopeful, then it wouldn't hurt so much every time their hopes were crushed. Not every Stanley Yelnats has been a failure, Stanley's mother often pointed out, whenever Stanley or his father became so discouraged that they actually started to believe in the curse. The first Stanley Yelnats, Stanley's great-grandfather, had made a fortune in the stock market. He couldn't have been too unlucky. At such times, she neglected to mention that the bad luck that befell the first Stanley Yelnats. He lost his entire fortune when he was moving from New York to California. His stagecoach was robbed by the outlaw, Kissing Kate Barlow. If it weren't for that, Stanley's family would have now been living in a mansion on a beach in California. Instead, they were crammed into a tiny apartment that smelled of burning rubber and foot odor. If only, if only. The apartment smelled the way it did because Stanley's father was trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. The first person who finds a use for old sneakers, he said, will be a very rich man. It was this latest project that led to Stanley's arrest. The bus ride became increasingly bumpy because the road was no longer paved. Actually, Stanley had been impressed when he first found out that his great-grandfather was robbed by Kissing Kate Barlow. True, he would have preferred living on the beach in California, but it was still kind of cool to have someone in your family robbed by a famous outlaw. Kate Barlow didn't actually kiss Stanley's great-grandfather. That would have been really cool, but she only kissed the men she killed. Instead, she robbed him and left him stranded in the middle of the desert. He was lucky to have survived, Stanley's mother was quick to point out. The bus was slowing down. The guard grunted as he stretched his arms. Welcome to Camp Green Lake, said the driver. Stanley looked out the dirty window. He couldn't see a lake, and hardly anything was green. Okay. So as you continue to read chapters 4 and 5, I want for you to be thinking about what is the setting of Camp Green Lake. So you've got a lot of the background on it. What does it sound like? What does it look like? What do you think it smells like? Okay. What are some of the things you might see there? What does it look like? The animals. Okay. those are the things I want you to think of. When you are working on your packet, question 2 is actually the one that we're focusing on. If you flip over and look at question 2, you'll see that it says, in detail, describe the setting of Camp Green Lake. Then write some emotions that a setting like this might cause. So as you're describing the setting, what you'd see, what you'd smell, hear, all these things, I want for you to think, what would that make you feel like? If you were Stanley rolling up to Camp Green Lake, how do you think you'd be feeling when you saw that? Would you be excited? Would you be scared? Would you be disappointed? What are some of the things you might feel as you get to a place like that? Okay? Once you have this wrote down, you're going to answer question number 2 in a go formative. Okay? Only question 2 in the go formative. You still need to answer the rest of them, but the only one I want to see today is going to be question 2 because that covers our target of talking about how the setting creates the tone and the emotions for the book. Okay? So you're going to put that on the go formative. It's linked on our Google Classroom. But I also want for you to look at the quick write. The quick write is, do you believe in curses and bad luck? I want for you to tell me whether you believe in curses and bad luck. Is Stanley's family really cursed? Does that actually happen? Or do you think it's just a bunch of made up stuff that he shouldn't be worried about? If you want to write that on a Google Doc or take a picture of it and send it to me, that would be awesome because I'd love to see how you all are feeling about that as well. Okay? I can't wait to talk to you all later. I hope you have a fantastic Monday, and I hope to see everybody when the Comic Caravan comes around this afternoon. Have a great day. Bye, Super Scholars.